Hello and welcome back to all 1,230 plus of you avid consumers of Pax Dei content out there and the nearly 60% of you who have not yet decided to hit that subscribe button. I'm Altari, the professional gamer, and this is another PAX Friday review, the show where we talk about all the fun, interesting, new, and exciting information that has dropped for Pax Dei over the last week. I would also like to extend a firm and professional handshake to all of our channel members out there. Thank you again for supporting us. In today's episode, we have over 45 minutes of mainframe interview to go over. Yes, the self-proclaimed brand risk Narc was able to step away from mainlining his copium and gave a really good interview with Petur, one of the mainframe developers for Pax Dei. It is 45 minutes long, and I have a link up here and down there, so if you want to go ahead and watch that, by all means, go do it. It is an amazing interview to listen to and really soak in all of the information. But if you want to save some time, stick around. We are going to be covering all of the new information from this interview. And when I say that, I want to make sure all of you get all of the important points. So make sure you stick through to the very end, as we are going to try and bang this out as quickly as we can for all of you. That being said, if you haven't done so already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, like while you're down there, and share this video with any of your friends who might be interested in Pax Dei. First things first, what are we not going to be learning in this interview? The one question that I know a lot of you are having is there another alpha date? When are we going to be getting in? Who is going to be getting in? That is not something that is covered in this interview. It took all the way to the last minute of the interview to actually ask it, and they are not ready to reveal a new alpha date for us yet. Additionally, the developers don't really want to talk explicitly about PvP mechanics. However, they also revealed a lot more new information than we had about PvP in this interview, so take that with a grain of salt. And there will also be, obviously, the overarching, this is all a alpha and everything is in a rapid iteration state. So anything even that they said in this interview is obviously subject to change and based on player feedback. Second things first, talking about crafting. So they went very in depth with how they envision crafting to work in the final state of the game, and from the onset it was very clear that the direction that they're taking is skill, or crafting skill is something that is going to kind of offset your probabilities in one direction or the other. Now, they did state they need to make sure their UI elements are clearly giving players the knowledge of where they're gonna be passing or failing a craft. One of the big things that was revealed is that master crafting, or what I would picture is if your blue bar gets all the way to the very end without a single inch or sliver of red, you will get an additional spell or an additional effect that gets applied to the piece of gear that you are crafting. In addition, they spoke very briefly about enchanting, which is different from master crafting, but both have semi-similar effects. Master crafting, you can get an additional spell or an effect that is going to be also random, but you can point it in a direction using specific reagents or possibly crafting at certain times of day or something like that. But enchanting is something that is done after your craft has already been finished. So master crafting is done at the craft. Enchanting is something that has an entirely different skill associated with it and is done after a item has been crafted. It was also mentioned that you would potentially be able to disenchant and re-enchant, but that might require a lot of resources in order to do, though it might be something that higher level players would consider if they have an almost best in slot piece of gear and they just want to keep on getting and rolling for that right enchantment that they're looking for. But that being said, the enchantments will also be able to apply certain effects, possibly passive bonuses, or even more skills or magic as well, which is all really, really cool. In addition to that, when we were talking about crafting, the developers also mentioned something that I found really, really interesting. And this is actually a mechanic that I only recently was introduced to in a game called V Rising. I'm sure many of you have played it, but essentially it is this idea that, for example, a blacksmith's workshop is going to be incentivized to look like a blacksmith's workshop. From the last alpha, one thing that many of you noticed, and one thing that I found kind of breaking in terms of immersion, was that you just had an entire room that was filled to the brim with every single crafting station that existed in game. There was absolutely no incentive to work with other players, and you could pretty much fit everything into one plot. That is something that Mainframe confirmed is not going to be a possibility, at least for the highest tier crafters in the game, because space economy is something that is actually going to exist in game. You are going to have to make choices, even as a solo player, of what you're going to be placing on your plot in order to make the things that you want to make. So while a solo player definitely could still be one of the best blacksmiths on the server, that means that they're going to be sacrificing their ability to be able to craft other things in the game. There's potentially going to be building pieces and things that you'll have to put that fit almost like a blacksmith's tile set that will increase your probability of favorable crafts in something like blacksmithing. I think this might also be something akin to when in Valheim you have the different tool stations that upgrade the level of like your forge, for example. In regards to crafting, books were mentioned in a couple of different places, but books with regards to crafting specifically are going to play an integral role. Now, they will play that role or fulfill that role in a couple of different ways, and one of those being the discovery of new recipes, but some of those might actually be books that will give you advances in your skill or even unlock new skills for you to have. Some of those books can even be included in your workshop for whatever type of trade skill you are working on, and those might even give you passive buffs. In regards to crafting as a whole, the one thing that was mentioned by the devs was that all of these different aspects are going to be ways for players to essentially control or edge the RNG in their favor. So if you want to craft something that has a specific buff or a specific spell, and you're looking to get that master crafted bonus to it as well, you can include certain reagents that are going to nudge that RNG in the direction of the spell or passive or skill that you're looking for. In addition to that, they did mention that there will be things like equipment and food, as well as your surroundings and the stations themselves that you're working on, which are going to improve your chances of getting more and more successful crafts. So the best crafters in the game are going to have a plot that is completely filled with all of these different items to just continually increase their probabilities of getting the best crafts that they can. For people wondering, crafting skills will also be able to help determine what you can get back if you fail a craft. For players with exceptionally high skills in certain crafting disciplines, if they do actually fail one of their crafts, the higher their skill difference is from what they're actually crafting can really actually scale and determine the resources that they receive back. Speaking of crafting as well, they mentioned a couple of new disciplines. Other than enchanting, they also spoke briefly about animal husbandry and how that's going to look. One of the exciting things that they did mention, however, this is very early on and is obviously subject to change, as is everything in this interview. They mentioned that animals and horses are going to have potentially a breeding mechanic where players who are participating in that particular trade skill are going to be able to select animals, go out into the world, find them. Maybe there's animals of different rarities even, and you're going to be able to bring those animals back and breed them together to get better results. One of the things that they did mention as well is that at least ranged combat on horses is going to be a lot easier than melee combat on horses due to latency issues with melee combat and also the speeds of things. Though I do hope that they will be able to find some kind of system so that we can at least joust in game. The reason that we have horses is going to obviously help with travel. One of the things that existed in the alpha that Mainframe mentioned isn't going to exist in future iterations, or is going to be toned down a whole lot, is teleportation. And what they mentioned for teleportation in this interview is that that is something that they'll eventually start to weed out, though they do want to keep some kind of system in game. So there will be some mechanics that are quality of life based, but for the most part, Mainframe wants us to be exploring the world and driving those kind of organic interactions that we're going to have with other players. Some mounts are going to be used for inventory space, and speaking of inventory space, one of the things that they also talked about was how backpacks are definitely going to be something they want to include in the game, and it just didn't make it into the most recent alpha. So backpacks are going to obviously increase the storage capacity that exists on a player, and one thing that they did mention is that it's not going to increase the current stackable quantities that you can have in your inventory, but it will expand your inventory so you can place more things in it, if that makes sense. Another side note, just tracking back a little bit to mounts, they did want mounts to be something that are physicalized and exist in the world, and they don't want to necessarily break immersion by having horses teleport in and teleport out and be there one moment and not be there the next. And I would imagine if they have a husbandry system, that maintaining the health of your horse is going to be important, even going so far as feeding it or making sure it's well sheltered when you're logged off. But one of the main constraints with that is if you have 22,000 players that exist on a single shard, and that means you're going to have at least that same number of horses that exist in the game, and most likely significantly more. So if those are all physicalized entities, that can get really, really costly for their servers. Next, they also brought up books, and this was a really exciting part of it because they mentioned how books are going to be a part of research gameplay. They said that not only will we be able to go out into the world and discover books, but we'll also be able to craft books in one way or the other. And these are going to unlock new skills for us, as well as potentially provide static or passive increases to certain skills while also potentially unlocking new ones. Other than that, in terms of discovering new areas, Mainframe has reiterated how massive their map is going to be. And while they didn't give any more specifics on how big a region is going to be, we know that there are going to be 4 regions that exist. One of the things that Mainframe did mention in this interview, though, is that they want all of the expansion for the game as the game grows, and obviously they have the rest of the map that they need to fill in, but once it's filled in, they want to also emphasize putting new content in the spaces that they've already placed content to begin with. So rather than constantly expanding outward and spreading the player base more and more thin, they want the player base to be able to set down their roots and explore the same areas but uncover new things, like dungeons popping up that didn't exist before, or unlocking new pathways to other areas that didn't exist. So it enforces players going back and exploring the same places that they did before, but with new eyes and new lenses to see and learn new things about the game. The last thing that I wanted to talk about, and one of the biggest things that they mentioned during this, was also quite surprising: PvP mechanics. So they prefaced with very early on that they weren't going to discuss many of the PvP mechanics that exist in the game, and for the most part they didn't. However, there was this one section of the interview where Petur literally gave up the beans on probably one of the biggest PvP mechanics that exist in Pax Dei, at least by the sound of it, and that is the feudal system. On this channel, we have mentioned there being a potential of a feudal system before, but we never had solid confirmation from the devs, and in this interview, we finally got it, and boy, did they spill all of the beans at once. So not only do we have a feudal system, which includes components like knights, but it's how all of these different components and player organizations add together to sum up all the way to potentially kingdoms that can war with each other. Now, in terms of the actual PvP mechanics that exist and that were revealed in this interview, they made it very clear that wars are going to be something that can happen, and they are going to be 100% opt-in. So what that means is if you want to participate in PvP, one thing that a player is going to most likely have to do is become a knight. Now, how you become a knight wasn't explained altogether. It might be through factions that exist in game, or it might be through player-made factions, but either way, you have to go through some process of becoming a knight. And the reason why we say that you have to go through a process is because if you don't want to go through a process, but you still want to participate in PvP, you can pledge your fealty to one of these players who has become a knight, and you can participate in the PvP on their side. Now, all of these knights will be able to potentially fight in open world PvP with enemy factions or other groups or knights that they're at war with. This could be in a dungeon, everywhere except the home valleys, because those are supposed to be PvE only. But any of the dungeons and areas in the wildlands, if you see one of these warring enemy knights, you'll be able to fight. They went a little bit further and said that knights can then pledge fealty to one another, or they can combine to form a barony. And then they said that baronies can eventually unite together to form kingdoms. So these are all different player organizations that are all formed under this kind of PvP blanket, which is where I believe they're saying that PvP is opt-in. If you don't want to participate in the PvP at all, then you just don't have to pledge fealty to a knighthood or a barony or a kingdom, and you might be completely relinquished of having to participate in PvP unless you go into a PvP zone where it's kind of like anyone who's in that zone is able to fight in PvP. So all of that together, we have this feudal system that was just unveiled. It is really, really cool to hear. And then the last tidbit of information that they revealed is feudal castles. So we have this feudal system, you have knights, and then they mentioned that you'll even potentially be able to have castles that you build up as players, and then you will be able to siege other players' castles. And I don't know if this is going to be in a specific region. The one PvP zone that they did mention is contested provinces. That, to me, sounds like a place where you would be building one of these potential castles for your knighthood or barony or kingdom. All in all, a very exciting reveal for the PvP system. I definitely wasn't expecting it, and I was so happy when they revealed it. So we are done with all of the new information. In 20 minutes or less, we got everything to you. Hopefully you enjoyed all of this content, and if you did, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, like this video if you enjoy this type of content, and share with any of your friends who might be interested in Pax Dei. Until next time, I'm Altari, the Professional Gamer.